Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? Wow, a lot of energy, I love it. Yeah. Hey, welcome everyone. My name's Dan Ayoub. I'm the General Manager of Mixed Reality and Education at Microsoft, and really excited to be here to talk with you all today. Excuse me, bit of a cold. So, first of all, super excited to be here today. You know, this conference as a whole kind of hits two really big passion areas for me. You know, gaming, which was my life for most of my career. I was like 20 years in classical game development at publishers and developers and things like that. And more recently, you know, mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality as it pertains to education. Bit of a fun backstory there, what actually got me to make the change. So I was away, you know, toiling away in game development, really excited about what I was doing. And I started doing some research into virtual reality just for some game development projects that I was working on. And I started to get fascinated with the applications, in particular for education, as I started to get into the neuroscience behind it and how the brain reacted to it. And I was just really blown away by how powerful a tool this could potentially be. I said to myself, this is going to change education forever, and I just really need to be a part of it. And I was very fortunate to be able to make the change, and I've been working in that field ever since. And it's just been really, really remarkable. So on a personal level, you know, education is really important for me. You know, education is empowerment. It allows us to transform ourselves. It allows us to do things that we normally couldn't do. You know, personally, I grew up in a very low-income household in Canada, but I was fortunate that I had access to great education, you know, be it schools, after-school programs, libraries, things like that. And it really changed my life and opened my eyes to millions of new things. And it's really been, you know, made clear to me, you know, as these, you know, over my life and the years that I've been working in education since then, that, you know, education is critical regardless of age, right? Often when we think of education, we're thinking about school children, school-age children, things like that. But that's not what it's like. It is a lifelong endeavor, and what we're really trying to do at Microsoft in our education programs is exactly that, grow that lifelong love of learning and get people excited about the process and excited about learning and get people to the point where they understand that this is something that's going to happen for their entire lives. And, you know, education is more important than ever. You know, looking at the challenges we face as a society or as a species, we need as many educated people as we can get. And also, things are changing really quickly. You know, you may have heard the stat that 85% of jobs in 2030 haven't even been invented yet. So, I mean, how do you even prepare for that? How do we prepare our children for this thing that's coming? You know, you look at AI, machine learning, things like that, and how it's going to transform jobs and change jobs and things like that. Education is really, really key. And in addition to being more important than ever, it's important that people begin to realize that it is this lifelong endeavor. I mean, even just in my generation, the notion of go to school, go to work, you're done is gone, right? And that's going to be even more so the case for the next generation. So we need to take steps now to teach people how to retrain themselves, how to learn, and how to love learning. You know, when you look at what it takes for that 21st century citizen, it's really fascinating because there's a direct overlay to what companies are saying they need as key attributes for workers in the future. You know, it comes down to things like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking. These are things that are going to be required not only to be a functional citizen in the future, but also to be a functional worker and you know, a profitable employee. And as you know, going back to what I was saying about AI and machine learning, the ability to work in teams, to think creatively, to work critically with one another is going to become even more important. And as I said earlier, you know, as important, it's to teach students how to learn. How we're learning today has already begun to change immensely, and it's going to continue to change. So it's not simply about, you know, memorizing some facts and things like that. It's how do you teach yourself? How do you reinvent yourself over the course of your life? And, you know, one thing that I've come to understand and believe very, very deeply is that, you know, education never really ends. There's no destination. Education is a journey, and we need to get as many people onto that journey as possible right away. Oh, sorry, did I just go backwards? All right, bit of a slide problem there. Okay, I'm going to move on. That slide is not showing up. But just talking a little bit more about how education has changed. If you think like when I went to school, it was just very much, you know, backpacks and library books and textbooks and things like that. And now there's more group work. How do we work in groups? How do we continue to learn new things? A lot of technology has come to bear. So how do we take all of these things into account? So I want to take a few minutes to talk about mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality. I'm going to use mixed reality as a bit of a catch-all term for that. So as I started to work in the space, it became really apparent there's some great tools out there. There's some great virtual reality and mixed reality experiences. And it was just really fascinating. And when I talk about content for mixed reality, I actually often think of curriculum as well as experiences because both of those things are super important. But I had this passion for it. But as I started talking to teachers and educators in high schools and universities and things like that, it became clear that there were a lot of questions as to how effective mixed reality was for education. So one of the things that became clear for us in a first effort we undertook was to actually do some studies. And it's like, does this improve learning outcomes, right? Do grades go up? Does retention go up? Yes, is the answer, is the short version. So, what we didn't want to do is do our own research to start with because, we have an obvious bias. So we started by looking at peer-reviewed studies that have been done on mixed reality in education. And the outcomes were pretty universal and pretty powerful. First of all, it does improve learning outcomes. Grades go up as a result of using this kind of technology. Retention goes up considerably as a result of using this technology. And there's been all kinds of studies done on this. I get most interested in the A/B testing where we compare them to classical methods of learning. And the results are incredibly powerful and incredibly empowering. And there's even more and more cases of people actually doing testing in mixed reality as well. So we're seeing more and more of these cases, and we're seeing fantastic results. It fosters self-directed learning as well. What's really interesting from a cognitive standpoint, learning in mixed reality reduces the cognitive load. So simply put, it takes less brain power to learn what it is that you're trying to learn. The obvious low-hanging fruit for things like this are things like STEM and engineering, but there's also applications really across the board in pedagogy. One of the ones I get really excited about, too, is its ability to create empathy. You may have heard VR referred to as an empathy machine. You can literally put people into somebody else's shoes, and this is just one of the things that I get really, really excited about as we look down the future of this technology. It also allows us to create more inclusive classrooms. We talked a bit about empathy, but there's also special education. At ISTE earlier this week, we unveiled a learning program for reading to help people, who have challenges reading to improve their ability to do so. It's just a prototype, but we're seeing very positive results from that. And you can literally break the laws of physics, right? You can do things with your students that they could never do in real life. It's one of the reasons I joke, I think chemistry apps are so popular because you can just let people blow up a lab and not worry about it too much. And, I think another big potential for the technology is to transform distance learning, right? You look at classical online learning, it's generally videos and things like that. The dropout rate is enormously high just because there's no cohort, there's no sense of a class. I can't work with a teacher to do something. And, you just think about the power if you could learn a new subject with people from around the world and be in there together. Just the power of that is incredible. So one last bit on, I'm not going to read the quote for you guys can all read it, but there's a great quote from Asimov when he talks about how education used to be and why he gets excited about technology. And this is one of the things that gets me very jazzed. You look in the past, you go way back in education, people used to hire a tutor for one-to-one learning, but that was really very expensive and that wasn't something that the masses could afford. So you find yourself in the classical education setup that you see today, right? A single teacher in front of a class of students. That is not optimized in any way around personalized learning or giving students what they need. With this kind of technology, you start to get to the point where everyone can have their own tutor. Everyone can go and learn subjects they want at their own pace and have that one-to-one. And it makes this technology incredibly powerful. So we're very convinced now on the power of mixed reality. One of the first questions we started to ask ourselves as we finished this research phase is, how do we keep this accessible? If this technology is this powerful, what we do not want to do is increase the gap. We don't want to increase the divide. We don't want this to be limited to students or school districts that have, great funding and can afford the technology. Because we're just seeing, we're seeing it in action and we're seeing the results. how do we keep this equal? How do we make sure everyone has access to it? So, which brings us to the topic of libraries. And libraries were something we were looking at along with museums and things like that. But admittedly, I didn't really have my head around how we were going to go about doing this, right? It was just, there's something we wanted to do in the libraries and didn't know how the best way to go about doing it. And quite just bluntly, I still had the somewhat ignorant assumption that people don't go to libraries that much anymore, right? Like a lot of people have that conclusion. And I felt a little better to find out I'm not the only one that thought like that. But so I didn't really know how to go about engaging it and if that was the right place to go. So we were at Northwestern University. We were just having a conversation with them around classrooms of the future and how is technology changing education. And really fascinating, a couple of the professors had been doing research on learning. And we saw some fascinating data that really, really woke me up and made us look into a few other areas, that more and more learning is happening outside of the classroom. And that doesn't, that obviously means students, but that means learners of all ages. There's actually data to show that the amount of learning happening in the classroom is going down. And there's a lot of reasons for that. In some cases, it's funding, which is a sad state of affairs where many cases schools can't afford to stay open for a full day, and a lot of students are like filling the gaps by going to libraries or after school programs or things like that. But that really stuck with me, and it got us starting to talk to libraries and librarians. For any librarians or anyone who works in, okay, I have had my eyes open to the work you guys are doing, and like my hat goes off to you. Because first of all, they were very patient with my ignorance, which I really appreciate, as we started to have conversations with them. But one in particular is we were talking about how we engage with libraries and how to think about librarians to help in education. Just broke it down for me in a way that was so powerful and just really cinched this for us that this was an area we had to be in. Libraries have always been about promoting literacy, and that's not changing. But that mandate is changing a little bit to include digital literacy. And I've had a number of great conversations with libraries and librarians around the country just saying, like, people are coming in to re-educate themselves and learn about the new technologies. People are starting to see libraries as a place to transform themselves and learn more about the technology that's coming. And it just became clear to me that, like, okay, wow, we absolutely have to be doing something in this space because there's this massive digital transformation happening in this space. And this is, these are entities that are open to anybody. Anybody can go into a library and learn about whatever they want. And then we started spending some time thinking about engagement models and how libraries work, right? Museums are another area we're doing work at, but as a general rule, if you go to a museum, you're going for a particular exhibit or to check something out in particular, whereas libraries, people are going in several times a month just to check things out, just to learn about a new thing. And it became really important to us to start to be a part of that. So, which led us to announce a new fund this week that we call the Limitless Libraries Grant, where pretty much any library in the US, for starters, can apply to this fund. And we are going to provide hardware to allow these libraries, and this can be school libraries or public libraries, to come in and apply for this grant. And this grant for us is important for a couple of reasons. We talk about keeping things equal access. This way we can make sure that regardless of what territory you're in, this hardware can actually be in place. But it was really fascinating, after months of these conversations, we wanted to do things very, very differently. One thing we were adamant that we did not want to do is just box up a bunch of hardware and send it out to libraries, right? Like, that's easy to do, but I just had this nightmare scenario of a bunch of, really cool hardware sitting in a back shelf somewhere because people don't necessarily know how to use it. This is new technology. There's a learning curve. So the selection process is going to be interesting for us, but one of the things that's key for us is that we want to be boots on the ground, with whatever library we basically end up doing this with. And that includes a couple of things. There's going to be benefits to the library, but also benefits for us. So that means we're going to help the libraries set this thing up. We're going to teach them how to get in there and launch it, help the librarians get the workflow going and figure out how to use it and show other people how to use this. The benefits to us from that is we can learn what's working and what's not, right? We can find out if our flows are too complicated. We can find out things that we need to change. We're also going to get back a great amount of data from all of the people that are using these things. But as we looked at what we didn't want to do we did, it's easy to box up hardware and, FedEx it over to a library, but we really wanted to do something different because our goal is to make sure that people are actually using this technology. Because, our goal is just to have this magical technology out there so anyone can use it. Anyone can stroll into a library, learn about the technology itself and how it works, or to potentially get in there and learn more about a subject, or do one of these empathy exercises, or go to the moon, or go to Mars, or something like that. And potentially down the line, maybe even communicate with people at other libraries that are using this and have some great conversations and learn more about one another. So we launched this fund earlier this week at ISTE. Frankly, have not even had time to check the response to it. I'm hoping it's good. We've been very excited about the conversations we had. But, I think I've had a couple of learnings myself out of this that, just in closing, as I say, I only got a few minutes left to share. First of all, libraries are undergoing a massive transformation. There is incredible work happening there. If you haven't been to one in a little while, I highly recommend going to do it because it's quite amazing. They're putting in computer labs, they're putting in maker spaces, they're really, really doing some fascinating things. The other thing I've learned, librarians are some of the most passionate, frankly, badass educators that you are going to meet. They are very passionate about the space. I'll say it again, very patient with people like me, which I really appreciate, but also extremely committed to what it is that they want to do. And I'm really excited to continue learning from them as we get this thing going out. And we're also going to have a bunch of pilots going as well that are going to help us shape the rest of this program as we roll out into other phases. Thank you very much for coming today, and I hope to chat with you all a bit later. Thank you.